Hello and welcome, folks. I had a little bit of a breakdown in my usual station. So I'll do a last minute move over here. So we're in a little bit of a different spot, and I'm literally just getting set up. But that's okay. That's all right. And you're super close up to me now. I'm like, whoa, you're like up in my face. I'm usually at a table where I can like move and do stuff. But this will be a little bit different here. All right, we'll get started. Let me give it one more moment here, and then we'll jump in and talk about why it is so hard to be finished sometimes. So that's what we're going to be jumping in and talking about. Let me just move one thing here. That's we're in kind of a strange new setup, strange new world. Um, so that this is a little bit better here, and then I'll jump right with you. Okay, I think that'll be better. There we go. All right, I think we're good to go now. So now I think we're except I still can't move around. But I think I'll live. So let's talk a little bit about why being done can be so hard. Because starting something is one thing, but finishing it is something else entirely. You know, I think we give a lot of attention and celebration uh, to starting, and we should also, of course, to the finishing up and to ending. But we talk a lot about courage and momentum and things like taking the first step, beginning before you're ready, and I talk about that quite a bit, the importance of starting, and all of that does matter, but starting isn't actually where most projects, I know my projects, get into trouble. I'm super good at getting stuff started. I can get 6 new projects going before breakfast. I can have an idea while working on another idea and stop and write it down, get that it connects with 3 old ideas, and all of a sudden create an entire new body of work, and I won't even have had coffee. And that's delightful, and there's lots of possibility in that because nothing has gone wrong yet. It sounds brilliant, it might be extraordinary, it could change someone's life, whatever it is, the class, the painting, the book. Um, at the beginning, the thing can still be anything, but at some point, it does have to become something, and that's where things can get complicated because finishing is kind of the least sexy part of making a lot of times. It's a very different kind of work, and it asks different things from us. I talk a lot about how we treat unfinished work as evidence of laziness or poor discipline or a lack of commitment. And I mean, okay, I guess sometimes that's it. Um, Sometimes we're avoiding it. I'm a classic procrastinator. I mean, it's my jam. Sometimes we need to just sit our asses down in the chair and finish the thing, but in my experience, at least, often the difficulty is a lot deeper. To finish something means you are closing the possibilities. It's saying that this is the book, the painting, the class, the business. This is what I could make with my time, my skill, my knowledge, my energy, my money and resources, and all the courage that I had available. Um, Not the thing that it could have become in some perfect kind of other future, you know? Uh, it's this thing here, now, as it is finished, and that can feel like a loss and can come with some grief. When a project is unfinished, it still contains all of that possibility. Your novel could still become the masterpiece you saw it as somewhere in the fog. The unfinished painting might still be exactly what was in your head and photorealistic before you tried to translate it. But the moment you declare something finished, most of those possible versions of it disappear. They're eradicated at that moment. You've selected one version of the thing. So finishing is really an act of commitment, and commitment is also an act of exclusion. You are saying this and not that. You are saying now, not someday. Here, not everywhere. Um, and I think this is one reason that we like to I know I like to keep tinkering. One more edit, one more layer, one more feature in the class that you're developing, one more pass through the manuscript because I changed a comma on page 243, and now, obviously the whole book's falling apart. And we tell ourselves that we're improving the work, and sometimes we are. Sometimes we're protecting ourselves from the grief of choosing because the unfinished thing can still be perfect. Um, but the finished thing can only be real, and real things have limits. They reveal what we knew and what we did not know. They reveal our skill level, and where that skill met the very knife's edge. And they reveal where materials simply refuse to cooperate with us, where we got tired, where we got frustrated, where we changed our mind, where we got uncomfortable. It's it's weird for us and it is uncomfortable, but it's also the only way a thing enters into the world. Nothing real is going to arrive without some kind of limitation. The last part of a project is also often a lot less exciting, I think, than the first part. And I think that feels kind of unfair, but it just is the reality. It does tend to be a little bit less exciting than those really, passionate beginnings when everything's possible. The beginning is all discovery, the middle is development, and then the end is decisions and correction and repetition and cleanup and editing again and packaging and administrative bullshit for the most part. And the creative, like, kind of the writing of the book, let's say, the that creative part is one thing, but the proofreading, the formatting, the editing, the marketing, all of that is another. We think of pottery, which is the other thing that I spend a great deal of my time doing. One side of it is making the pottery, but the other is actually pricing and sanding and finishing and packing. Um, just like building a class is there's the creation, but there's also checking to make sure everything works, everything, functions the way that you wanted it to, and that's not the fun stuff, but it's the very necessary stuff. It's all part of finishing, and every project eventually is gonna ask us to shift modes. Inspiration has to hand the project over to evaluation. Discovery has to hand the project over to decision making, and those parts of the project. All of that expansive thinking finally has to be reductive. And the person who began the work, you or me, has to become the person who also finishes it. And those are not always the same, they don't feel like the same person. The beginning version is all about those possibilities, and we talked a bit about that before, about what this could be, in a prior talk of mine, what this could be, what possibilities exist, that curiosity and that discovery. But the finished version has to finally switch into what does it still need and how does it end? And those decisions have to be made. What does it no longer require to be considered in progress? I think finishing is often less about adding and more about refusing to continue to add. It's kinda knowing when the next sentence isn't gonna improve the paragraph, or the next color is just gonna muddy things. Another feature is gonna make the class you're developing too confusing. Another idea just belongs to that next project. So when your desire to keep working is no longer serving the work, that requires some real discernment. And discernment, I think we think discernment is certainty, but it's not certainty. Um, very, very, very rarely feel certain that something is done. I can say that quite honestly. Usually, I feel kind of a combo of, "I think it's done, maybe it's not done. No, it's gotta be done. I'm so totally sick of looking at this. I can't even tell whether this paragraph is good anymore. I think I changed this section 10 times, and I think 3 times ago was when it was actually best. Um, Maybe I ought to just burn this all down and start beekeeping instead." All of those questions and the conversations that are going on, and it doesn't necessarily mean the work is unfinished. It may mean that I've been standing too close to it for too long. There is a point in almost every project where effort kinda stops creating clarity. You still are touching the work, you keep on tweaking this and that, but you're not really seeing it or experiencing it anymore, and the movement can feel like progress, just like consuming creative content can feel like being creative. Um, Editing can look like improvement, activity can look like commitment, but sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just stop, because being done means tolerating the possibility that another hour might have made it better. It might have, it could have. That's the terrible part of all of this. You're never gonna know. If you stop now, we can't prove that it's the perfect decision. There's always something else that could be changed. But every finished work contains choices we might make differently later. And that's not a deficit, it's just evidence that we continued to grow after we made the work. If you look back at old pieces, I know if I look back at old writings of mine, old paintings of mine, old pottery of mine, if I go back and read my dissertation, whew, um, I look back at those things that I created years ago, and I see lots of things I would change now, but that makes sense because 'cause I'm not who I was then. My skills have changed, my tastes have changed, my perspective has changed, my understanding of the world has changed. So the goal really can't be to create something future you could not improve, because that means that future you hadn't learned anything and hadn't improved. The goal is really to make the best work that you can make, finish it, allow it to become part of the path that led you here, and led you on through your life. You just can't keep every project open until we become the final version of ourselves, because that assumes we are going to be the final version of ourselves. We are not going to become the final version of ourselves. Um, that's impossible, and frankly, I would find it kind of horrifying. Finished does not mean perfect forever. And I think that's what you have to accept in creative pieces, whatever those might be. Finished means completed enough to fulfill its purpose now. A sketch is not trying to be a finished painting, as we talked about in a prior talk, as I talked about in a prior talk, a first draft isn't failing because it's not ready to publish. A social media post does not need to carry the weight of your entire intellectual legacy. And a mug doesn't need to explain the human condition, it needs to hold a liquid, and that is enough. I think we make finishing harder sometimes because we ask the project to prove too much. We want a book or a short story to prove that we're real writers. We want one painting to prove that we're artists, one event to prove that our business, is a great idea and is gonna be successful. We want one application to prove that we're still professionally valuable, and that's too much pressure for any single piece of work. A project becomes nearly impossible to finish when it stops being a project and becomes a reflection of your entire identity. Not every flaw, uh, will feel dangerous anymore when you're not hanging your entire identity on that project. We have a tendency to make every decision permanent, and criticisms feel like exposure, and we're no longer simply trying to improve the thing, we are trying to secure ourselves through the thing. But work can't do that for us. A finished book is not permanently gonna resolve whether you're a writer. An successful event is not going to permanently resolve that your business idea, is great and that your business matters. And a beautiful painting is not going to permanently resolve whether you are a painter or an artist of talent. Those questions are gonna come back at some point. They always return. They'll return again. Uh, so the work really should be allowed to be smaller. A book is a book. A class is a class. A painting is a painting. A project is a project. It can matter deeply without being required to justify our existence. Um, and then there's also the fear of what happens after it's finished. And this one is kinda sneaky. You know, we say we are afraid the work is not ready. Sometimes I think I know I am afraid that it is, because once it's finished, we gotta decide what has to happen with it. Do you edit do you publish it? Do you price it? Do you show it? Do you sell it? Do you teach it? Let someone respond to it, critique it, evaluate it. While the work is unfinished, we can keep saying, "I'm working on it, not ready yet. You have not seen the real version. This is just a prototype." The unfinished project kind of protects the imagined version from judgment. No one can reject a thing that has not really been offered up into the world. You can't misunderstand a book that's never been published. You can't decide that a piece of art is too expensive if it's still sitting unpriced in the studio. You can't judge or evaluate those things, but finishing removes that protection, and it makes work available for judgment. And availability creates vulnerability, but it also creates relational possibility. You know, the possibility that someone reads it or uses it or questions it or loves it or learns from it, buys it, argues with it, um, carries it into a life that you won't see and that you're not part of. And the unfinished thing is only yours. That finished thing can have relationships without you. That's one reason that we finish, not because the work has achieved perfection or a perfect state. Um, I think my published works will definitely tell you that that is not the case, but it's because it's ready to participate. Um, so what helps? What helps us get to be ready to be finished and to show our pieces and to accept evaluation? I think first, you know, one of the big things is the definition of done. What does this done actually look like? And not a feeling of done, not this is what my gut feels like, but sometimes a real honest to goodness definition. What has to be true for this project to fulfill its purpose? Um, Not everything, not the whole gambit, not the whole line, not everything you might improve, but what must be true? You know, if you're developing a curriculum, if you're developing a class, that might mean clear objectives, activities that support those objectives, materials that are clean, error-free, and effective, and the ability for learners to use what they've learned after the class. And that might be that's what you're looking for. That is done. It does not mean including every single interesting thing you know about the subject. For event, it might mean, the event is well organized, everything is prepared, everything is inventory packed, transported, uh, all of those boring bit pieces of getting things ready are in place. there's a difference, and, I'm thinking in that kind of around my pottery events, because there's a difference between being creatively complete and operationally complete. For creative, for the pottery and for the paintings, um, those things aren't ready just because they've dried or because I've shaped them. Um, Pottery has to be dried, put into a kiln, glazed, put back into a kiln, still not finished yet. Then it has to be cleaned and priced, put into inventory and packed and transported and unpacked and displayed. It The final third of a project a lot of times begins after the project we think of, is actually over, the making part of it. Um, so I'm trying to see those later stages myself as part of the work rather than just this pain in the butt thing standing between me and the work. Pricing is part of the work, editing is part of the work, prototype testing is part of the work. Scheduling is part of respecting everyone that is involved in the work. The administrative edge of the work is still the work. And it also helps to create gates. So the draft ends on this date. The review ends on this date. I need, in terms of my pottery business, I really have to plan backwards for what clay work needs to stop on this date because the pieces need 2 weeks to dry. My kiln is not gonna negotiate with enthusiasm. It works the way it works every time, and the pieces need plenty of time to dry. The event date does not care that I had more ideas or got creative. A gate is really critical to keeping creative projects on track because a gate says you can continue caring about this project, but you may no longer continue doing this particular kind of work on it. I'm a huge fan of project management and project management practices, and I think they're incredibly important, for planning your own personal projects, creative projects, um, because you really do benefit, uh, from building those gates into your work, because finishing isn't just one decision. It's really a series of endings. You've got the end of research, you've got the end of drafting, of revision, of production, of making decisions, of deciding, and without all of those smaller endings or milestones, the project can just become one giant loop. Um, and open loops are exhausting. They sit in the room, they follow us into the shower, they wake us up at 3 in the morning to announce that perhaps the section title could be different. Sometimes finishing can be less about productivity and I think more about mercy. Closing a loop gives your mind somewhere to rest. And we also need to separate finishing a project from releasing it. You can finish something, like I could finish a piece of pottery and decide not to show it. You can complete an experiment and not ever turn that research and development into a product. You can finish a draft, and never publish it, wait years before publishing it. Finishing does not really require an experience. It just requires that we stop asking the work to remain open and stop asking it questions. Um, we have to accept that finishing also does not always feel great. Sometimes it feels great, sometimes it feels wonderful, sometimes it's, "Whew, check that off the list, and moving on." Sometimes there's relief, sometimes there's celebration, but sometimes it can feel uncertain. Sometimes there's a lot of anticipation. Sometimes it can feel kind of flat, uh, strange, even sad, and I think kinda sad and some degree of a dark cloud is pretty normal, really. You spend months or years with a project, and then all of a sudden it doesn't need you in the same way, and there is some real grief in that. Finishing creates an empty space that we then fill with questions. What now? What next? Was that worth it? Anybody even gonna like that? And those questions don't mean that you stopped too soon. They're just part of leaving and having that space. We talk a lot about perseverance, and I talk a good bit about staying with the work, which is incredibly important, during creation. But creative maturity is not only knowing how to stay, it's also learning how to leave and to recognize when the work is asking for more honest effort, uh, versus when it's asking to be released from our endless need to think that we're improving it. Being done is hard because it asks us to to accept reality over possibility. We have to choose and stop and tolerate imperfection and allow the work to be seen, grieve versions that we did not make, uh, and trust that this is not the last thing that we will ever create. And often I feel that can be the deepest part of it, that we cling to projects. We don't necessarily trust that there's gonna be another one. Am I gonna have another good idea? What if I don't come up with another book? What if I can't do another painting? What if, what if this is really my last chance? Finishing is an act of trust. You've got to trust that the work can stand without you hovering over it. Trust that you learned what this project came to teach you. Trust that the ideas that were not used are not lost, and trust that you're capable of beginning again. Done is not the death of possibility. It's just the moment possibility becomes form. And then because we finished, we get to make something else. It's not because the last thing was perfect, it's because it was complete enough to let us go. So, folks, I hope that that you enjoyed this quick live stream, this incredibly close up live stream, and I will see you all next time. I'll be scheduling another one of these before too long, and I will see you at the studio of the clouds here again soon. I hope y'all have a wonderful, wonderful week. Talk to you soon.